All right, so today we are diving deep into the Web Application Hackers Handbook, second edition.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's quite a read.
It's a hefty one.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
So we're gonna break down some of the key concepts around web application security
Yeah.
and
Mm.
really try to make this applicable to everyone who uses the web because
Absolutely.
it's kind of important these days.
It's essential.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's really interesting about this book is, it takes a different approach than a lot of security books out there.
Oh, okay.
A lot of them focus on network security or server security, but this one goes right to the applications themselves
I see.
and how their design can actually make them vulnerable.
Right, and we're not just talking about like a simple website here, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about web applications.
Exactly.
Things that we use every day for banking, shopping,
Yeah.
social media,
That's right.
all of that.
All of it.
So understanding these vulnerabilities is,
Yeah. It's critical.
yeah, it's pretty crucial.
The impact is huge. Yeah.
It can go way beyond just data theft. You know,
Right.
imagine an attacker manipulating a banking app to transfer funds,
Oh, wow.
or even shutting down a critical service like a power grid or something like that.
Yeah, that puts it into a whole new perspective.
Yeah.
So before we get into the how of these attacks, let's start with like the basic.
Okay.
What's the difference between like a typical website and a web application?
So think of a static website like a brochure.
Okay.
It's just presenting information.
Right.
You can click links, you can browse around, but you're not really interacting with it in a meaningful way.
Okay.
But a web application, that's dynamic. That's where you're logging in, you're submitting information, you're actually making changes.
Gotcha. So it's more than just reading content. It's actually like a two-way
Ex-
conversation with the site.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense now why they would be more vulnerable.
Right.
So in terms of like the weak points that attackers look for,
What are some of the key areas that they focus on?
it often boils down to how these applications handle user input.
Okay.
Anything you type, click, or upload,
Right.
that's all data.
Uh-huh.
And if it's not handled carefully, it can be manipulated.
I see.
Yeah. You can think of a web application like a complex machine.
Okay.
Tons of little gears.
Yeah.
If just one gear is out of place, the whole thing can jam up or even break down completely.
So it's not just about building strong defenses. It's about
Yeah.
making sure like every component
Every single piece
is working perfectly.
in sync. Yeah,
Yeah. That's pretty intense.
it is.
So from a developer's perspective, what are some of the key security mechanisms that they rely on to kind of protect these applications?
The big three are authentication, session management, and access control.
Okay, let's break those down.
All right, so authentication, that's verifying your identity when you log in.
Okay, so that's like the bouncer at the door checking your ID.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Session management, that's what keeps you logged in as you move around the site.
Okay, so like a key card that lets you into different areas.
Yeah, a good analogy.
Okay.
And then access control. That determines what you can and can't do once you're in.
Okay, so that's like the rule book
Exactly.
that says who's allowed to do what.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
So you have those three layers.
Right.
But of course, attackers have found ways to bypass these safeguards.
Right, because no system is perfect.
Exactly.
So let's start with authentication.
Okay.
What are some ways that attackers can kind of break through that initial barrier?
Well, one common method is brute force attack,
Okay.
which is basically just trying tons of different username and password combinations.
Right, just like going through a giant keychain until you find the right key.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And it can be surprisingly effective, especially with weak passwords.
Right.
Another way is to exploit flaws in things like forgotten password features.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, some sites have weaknesses in those systems that allow attackers to reset a password without actually knowing the original.
So it's like finding a secret backdoor.
Yeah, a hidden way in.
Yeah, that's a little unsettling.
It is.
So let's say they manage to log in somehow.
Right.
How do they stay logged in? Do they have to keep re-entering the stolen credentials?
No, that's where session management comes in.
Okay.
Most websites use something called session tokens,
Okay.
which are like temporary digital keys
Gotcha.
that prove your identity.
Uh-huh.
They're usually stored as cookies in your browser.
So if an attacker can get hold of that cookie, they essentially have like the keys to the kingdom.
Exactly.
Oh.
And it can happen more often than you think, especially if the website uses predictable session tokens.
Oh, I see.
And there are even techniques like bit flipping where they manipulate the encrypted data.
Bit flipping. That sounds
It
intense.
sounds very fancy.
Yeah.
But it's basically exploiting tiny errors in how data is transmitted or stored
Yeah.
to manipulate that token.
Gotcha. So it's like subtly altering the teeth on a key so it fits a different lock.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay, so we've talked about authentication. We've talked about session management.
Right.
What about access controls?
Okay.
How does a website actually know what each user is allowed to do?
So it all comes down to different levels of access.
Okay.
Like in a company, you have regular employees, they have access to certain files.
Right.
Then you have managers, they have more access.
Okay.
And then you have the CEO who has access to everything.
Makes sense. So it's about defining those roles and permissions
Exactly.
very carefully.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing there are scenarios where those access controls aren't as airtight as they should be.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sometimes the logic behind those rules is not as strict as it needs to be,
Uh-huh.
and attackers can find ways to slip through the cracks.
Like finding a hidden door in a video game that lets you skip levels.
Exactly.
Oh, I see.
So yeah, access controls are crucial, but they have to be implemented correctly.
Right, because even a small mistake can have huge consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then you have the data itself.
Right, because websites these days rely heavily on databases.
They do.
To store all sorts of sensitive information.
Usernames, passwords, financial data, all of it.
Yeah, it's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is.
And that brings us to one of the most well-known attack techniques, SQL injection.
Ah, yes, SQL injection, the classic.
Yeah, I've heard the term before, but to be honest, it always sounded a bit like technical jargon to me.
Yeah, that it can be a little intimidating.
Yeah.
But in simple terms, it's a way for attackers to manipulate the way a website talks to its database.
Oh,
So imagine you have a website with a search bar.
right.
When you type in a search term, the site sends a query to its database
Uh-huh.
to find matching results.
Okay.
Now, if the site isn't careful about how it handles that search term, an attacker can inject malicious code into the query itself.
So it's like sneaking a secret message into a seemingly innocent conversation.
Exactly. And the consequences can be pretty serious.
Like, what kind of things could they actually do with that kind of access?
Well, they could retrieve sensitive data like usernames, passwords, credit card numbers.
Oh, wow.
They could modify existing data, like
Yeah.
changing account balances or order details.
Okay.
In some cases, they could even take control of the entire database server.
Okay, now I'm starting to understand why this is such a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big one.
So how do they actually do it? I mean, is it like super complex hacking skills or something?
The actual mechanics can get pretty technical,
Okay.
but the underlying principle is about understanding how SQL works.
Right.
That's the language used to talk to databases
Right.
and finding ways to inject malicious commands into it.
So it's not just about breaking in, it's about like bending the rules of the system to your will.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So, for example, let's say a website uses a simple form to let users log in.
Right.
If the site doesn't properly check the user's input, an attacker could enter a specially crafted username or password. That includes malicious SQL code.
So developers really need to be extremely careful about how they build their applications
do.
to prevent these sorts of attacks.
It's crucial.
Yeah, it seems like every little detail matters.
It really does.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in understanding the basics of web application security.
Yeah, we've made a good start.
Yeah. And how attackers can exploit even seemingly small vulnerabilities.
Absolutely.
It's pretty fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Yeah, but also a bit unnerving.
Yeah, a little bit scary when you think about it.
Yeah, to see how these attacks actually work.
It's like a whole hidden world.
It is.
Yeah, and we've really only just scratched the surface.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, there are many other vulnerabilities out there.
Wow.
And new ones are being discovered all the time.
So it's a constantly evolving field.
Absolutely. It's a constant game of cat and mouse between the attackers and the security researchers.
So what's next on our little deep dive adventure into the hacker's playbook?
Well, next we're going to delve into some other common attacks,
Okay.
like cross-site scripting.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, that one exploits the trust between a website and its users.
I see.
And then we'll look at how vulnerabilities in the back-end components
Okay.
and the operating system itself can be exploited.
Wow.
And finally, we'll explore how hackers are using automation
Oh, right.
to make their attacks even more sophisticated and difficult to defend against.
So it sounds like we're just getting started.
We're just getting warmed up.
Listeners, we'll be back soon with part 2 of our web application security deep dive.
Stay tuned.
Don't touch that dial.
It's going to get interesting.
All right, so welcome back to our deep dive into the world of web application hacking.
Yeah, we're back.
Last time, we talked about SQL injection and how attackers can basically rewrite the rules of a website's database. It's kind of mind-blowing how something that sounds so technical can have such a huge impact.
Oh, it is. And SQL injection, it's powerful, yeah.
but it's just one weapon in the hacker's arsenal. So let's move on. Let's explore another common attack,
Okay.
cross-site scripting or XSS.
Okay, XSS. Yeah, I've heard of this one. I remember reading about a case where attackers injected malicious code into website comments
Yeah.
to steal user data. So it's all about exploiting the trust between a website and its user.
Yeah, I got it. So imagine a website where users can post comments, reviews, things like that.
Right.
If the website doesn't properly sanitize that user-generated content,
Okay.
an attacker could slip in some malicious JavaScript code.
Okay, hold on. When you say JavaScript, you're talking about the language that makes websites interactive.
Right. Exactly.
Like, those cool animations or dynamic forms, all that.
Right.
Yeah.
But JavaScript, it's a double-edged sword.
Oh, okay.
In the wrong hands, it can be used to manipulate website content, steal user data, or even hijack entire user sessions. So it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Looks harmless, but it's actually carrying a hidden payload. Can you give me like a real-world example
Yeah.
how this might play out?
Sure. Imagine an online banking site where users can post comments in a forum or something. An attacker could inject a malicious script into their comment.
Mm-hmm.
That, when viewed by other users, steals their login credential.
Oh, wow. That's pretty scary. So just by reading a comment, someone could have their entire account compromised.
That's the danger of XSS.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it can take many forms.
Okay.
You have reflected XSS,
Uh-huh.
which occurs when the malicious script is immediately bounced back to the user,
Okay.
often through a manipulated URL or form submission.
I see.
And then you have stored XSS.
Okay.
This is even more insidious. The attacker's script gets permanently stored on the website.
Oh, wow.
So every user who visits that particular page becomes a potential victim.
So it's like planting a time bomb on the website, just waiting for someone to trigger it.
Precise.
And I'm guessing that attackers are always coming up with new and creative ways to bypass security filters,
Oh.
inject their malicious code.
They're constantly innovating.
Yeah.
They might use obfuscation techniques to disguise their code or exploit vulnerabilities in how the website handles character encoding. It's a constant, cat and mouse game.
Yeah. It's amazing how much thought and effort goes into these attacks. It makes you wonder how developers can even keep up.
Yeah.
So we've talked about attacks that target user input like SQL injection, XSS. Are there vulnerabilities that exist even if users aren't actively typing data into a website?
Yeah, there are. Sometimes the vulnerabilities lie in how a website interacts with its back-end components.
Okay.
Things like databases, mail servers, or even the underlying operating system.
You mean like the stuff that most users never even see?
Right, behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And one example is OS command injection,
Okay.
where an attacker can trick the web server into executing arbitrary commands on the system.
Hold on, arbitrary commands. So that sounds like they could potentially take control of the entire server, not just a specific web application. How would they even do that?
So let's say a website has a feature that lets you upload a file, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then displays the file name back to you.
Okay.
If the website isn't careful about how it handles that file name,
Right.
an attacker could inject special characters that are interpreted as commands by the operating system.
So if I uploaded a file with a malicious name,
Yeah.
the website could unknowingly execute those commands on its own server.
That's the idea, yeah. OS command injection can give attackers a foothold on the server itself,
Wow.
allowing them to access sensitive files, install malware, or even use that server as a launching point to attack other systems.
That's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
It seems like no matter how secure a web application itself might be, there are always potential vulnerabilities lurking in the shadows.
That's true.
It makes you realize that security is not just about protecting the front door, but also securing the entire house.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Web application security, it's about understanding the entire ecosystem, how all the different pieces fit together, and recognizing that, there's no single thing as perfect security.
So it's more about managing risk than eliminating it entirely.
Exactly, yeah. It's
Right.
about implementing multiple layers of defense,
Okay.
staying vigilant, and being prepared to adapt to new threats as they emerge.
It sounds like a constant battle. always trying to stay one step ahead of the attackers.
It is. It is. But that also makes it incredibly fascinating, you know?
Yeah.
The ingenuity, the creativity behind these attacks, it's almost impressive in a twisted kind of way.
Right. Speaking of staying ahead of the game, we touched on automation earlier.
Hmm.
How are hackers using automation to make their attacks even more effective?
That's a great question. So in the early days of web hacking, a lot of it was manual, you know?
Uh-huh.
Hackers had to painstakingly craft each request,
Right.
test different inputs, analyze the responses. It was a much slower, more tedious process.
So as web applications have become more complex and the number of potential vulnerabilities has exploded, hackers have turned to automation to streamline their attacks.
Absolutely, yeah. It just makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Why waste time doing things manually when a computer can do it much faster and more efficiently?
Right. What kind of tools are we talking about here?
Well, there's a wide range of tools available
Right.
from open source frameworks like Burp Suite
Okay.
to custom scripts tailored for specific attacks.
I see.
These tools can automate tasks like spidering websites to identify potential vulnerabilities
Okay.
and fuzzing input fields with thousands of variations to see what breaks.
So it's like having a robot army of hackers working for you around the clock.
Yeah.
But surely developers have caught on to this, right? They must have ways to prevent these automated attacks.
Yeah, they do, but it's an ongoing arms race. For instance, many websites now use CAPI-TCHAs to try and distinguish between human users and bots.
Ah, those annoying puzzles with the distorted text that you have to decipher. I always wondered why those were necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
They can be effective at deterring simple bots,
Okay.
but determined attackers have found ways to bypass them.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Not so.
They might use optical character recognition software to solve the puzzles or even employ human sweatshops to do it manually.
Wow. That's pretty impressive. Or maybe depressing, depending on how you look at it.
Right.
Yeah.
So even something as simple as a CAPI-TCHA can be bypassed with enough effort.
Wow. So it's not a foolproof solution for hackers. They still need to be clever and adapt their techniques to overcome these obstacles.
Yeah, web application security, it's a constant game of cat and mouse.
Right.
As developers implement new defenses, attackers find new ways to circumvent them.
Makes sense?
It's a never-ending cycle.
And I'm guessing that's where the real expertise comes in. Not just knowing the tools and techniques, but understanding the underlying principles of security
Absolutely. Yeah,
and being able to think like an attacker.
that's key.
Yeah.
The best security professionals, they're the ones who can anticipate how an attacker might try to exploit a system
Right.
and then design defenses accordingly. It's about thinking several steps ahead and being prepared for the unexpected.
It sounds like a challenging but also incredibly rewarding field.
Mm-hmm.
And based on what we've discussed so far, I'd say it's a field that's only going to become more important
Oh, definitely.
as our reliance on web applications continues to grow.
For sure. Yeah, web application security, it's no longer a niche concern, you know?
Right.
It's a fundamental part of our digital lives these days.
Well said. Listeners, we'll be back soon with the final part of our web application security deep dive,
Don't go anywhere.
where we'll wrap things up and explore some practical tips for staying safe online. So stay tuned. All right, welcome back, everyone, for the final part of our deep dive into web application security.
Yeah, the grand finale.
It really is. And we've uncovered some pretty sneaky attack methods, haven't we?
We have, yeah, from hijacking database queries
Right.
to injecting malicious code into seemingly harmless features.
It's amazing how creative these attackers can be.
It is, yeah, they're always pushing the boundaries.
Yeah, so today we're going even deeper,
Okay.
exploring how hackers are using automation to really kind of ramp up their game.
That's right. Automation, it's a game changer.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
In the early days, a lot of this stuff was manual, right?
Oh, yeah, very much
Think
so. It was a lot of,
A lot of grunt work.
yeah, a lot of trial and error.
So picture a hacker hunched over a keyboard,
Yeah.
painstakingly crafting each request.
Right. Testing every input manually.
It's like trying to pick a lock with a paperclip.
Exactly. It might work eventually,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's going to take a while
And a lot of patience.
and a lot of luck.
Yeah, so as web applications have become more complex, the number of potential vulnerabilities has just exploded.
Oh, yeah, it's a massive attack surface now.
So hackers realized they needed a more efficient approach.
Right, they needed to scale up their operations.
And that's where automation comes in.
Exactly. It's like trading that paperclip for a sophisticated lock-picking kit.
Right. Suddenly you're working smarter, not harder.
Exactly. You can cover a lot more ground in a much shorter time.
So what kind of tools are we talking about here? I mean, can anyone with a bit of coding knowledge
Hmm.
create these automated attacks?
Well, there are tools for all skill levels, really.
Okay.
You have open source frameworks like Burp Suite.
Okay, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, it's very popular. It gives you a whole set of tools for testing web applications.
So like a Swiss Army knife for hackers.
Exactly. It can do a bit of everything.
So you can scan for vulnerabilities, you can fuzz inputs, all sorts of things.
That's right, and you can even automate those tasks.
So it's like having a robot army working for you.
In a way, yes.
But surely developers have caught on to this, right? They must have ways to protect themselves from these automated attacks.
Oh, they do, but it's a constant arms race.
Okay.
Like one common approach is rate limiting.
Okay.
So that's basically restricting how many requests can come from a single IP address.
So it's like putting a speed bump in front of your website.
Exactly. You want to slow those bots down.
Makes sense. But I'm guessing determined attackers have found ways to circumvent that.
Of course, they have IP rotation as a common technique.
Okay.
So they're constantly switching IP addresses.
So it's like having a fleet of cars taking turns hitting the speed bump.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
So no one car gets slowed down too much.
Exactly. They keep the momentum going.
So beyond rate limiting, what other defenses are out there?
Well, another popular one is CAPI TCHAs.
Yes, the puzzles with the distorted text.
Exactly, the ones that make you question your own humanity.
Right. It's like, am I a robot?
Exactly.
Yeah, but they're supposed to distinguish between humans and bots, right?
That's the idea, but they're not foolproof.
Because bots can just use image recognition software to solve them, right?
They can. And some attackers even use human sweatshops to solve CAPI TCHAs manually.
Wow, that's dedication.
It is. Yeah, they're not messing
So
around.
it seems like no defense is perfect.
Yeah.
There's always a way for a determined attacker to find a crack in the armor.
That's true to some extent, but it doesn't mean we should just give up.
Right. So what's the takeaway here? What can we do to protect ourselves?
Well, the key is to have a multi-layered approach to security.
Okay.
You're not just relying on one thing.
Right.
You combine technical defenses like rate limiting and CAPI TCHAs with things like secure coding practices, vulnerability scanning, and penetration testing.
So it's about creating a defense system that can adapt to the changing threat landscape.
Exactly. You need to be proactive and constantly evolving your defenses.
And I'm guessing a big part of that is staying informed, being aware of the latest attack technique.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power in this field.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been really insightful, and I think we've all learned a lot about web application security.
I hope so. Yeah, it's an important topic.
It really is. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
We hope you found it informative and maybe even a little bit entertaining
Yeah, security can be fun.
in a geeky kind of way.
Exactly.
So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there.
And keep learning.